Alright, so this is a review for the Chapter 10, Quiz 1. What you might want to do is take a minute, pause this video, try all of the problems first, and then play it to see if you've got them correct. If you do it that way, you can fast forward through any of the problems, check the answer, and then only go back and watch the ones that you got wrong. Alright, so let's take a minute and look at number 1. Number 1 asks you to determine whether x equals 1 is a 0 of this function. Now there's two ways that we can do that. The first way that we can do that is by synthetic division, right? If we use synthetic division, the idea is that the remainder has to equal 0. If the remainder equals 0, then it is a 0 or a root or a solution. So let's try that method. So we'd put the negative 1 on the outside. We have an x cubed, an x squared, an x, and a constant, so none of them are missing. So we have a 1, 2, negative 8, and 36. So we would bring down the 1, get negative 1, 1, negative 1, negative 9. Negative 9 times negative 1 would be 9, so we would get 45. So here, my remainder is 45, which tells me that negative 1 is not a factor. Now, the other way you could have done this is instead of using synthetic division, you could have simply used substitution. If you use substitution, the idea is, again, that it would have to equal 0 in order to be a solution. So we would say p of negative 1 equals negative 1 cubed plus 2 times negative 1 squared minus 8 times negative 1 plus 36. All right, so then we can literally just type this whole thing in the calculator as we see it, or you could go ahead and say, oh, this is negative 1. Negative 1 squared would be a positive 1. Times 2 would be a positive 2. Would be a plus 8. And plus 36. So we have 1. 1 plus 8 is 9. Sorry, that was a 36. So negative 1 plus 2 is 1. 1 plus 8 is 9. 9 plus 36 would end up giving me 45. So p of negative 1 equals 45, which again, since it's not 0, that means that negative 1 is not a factor. Now, since they asked you just to determine if it's a factor, you could have done either one of these. You didn't have to do both, but if I asked you to show me it in two different ways, those would be the two different ways that you would show it. All right, number 2 specifically says that you must use synthetic division to determine if x equals 4 is a solution to this. And there's a second part. If it is, then factor the polynomial. So let's deal with the first part. So we have an x cubed and x squared, but realize there's no x term, so we have to take into account that there's not by making it a 0x, so that when I go to set up my synthetic division, we have a 4 on the outside, and then it's 1, negative 6, the 0 because there were 0x terms, and then 32. So we can bring this down. 1 times 4 is 4, which gives me negative 2 when I add it. So 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. 0 and negative 8 is negative 8. 4 times negative 8 is negative 32. We get a 0 for the remainder. Since this is a 0, that means that it is a factor. If we would have gotten any other number, it would not have been a factor. So right now, I know that the 4 is a factor, so that means x equals 4 is a solution. So that tells me that x minus 4 is a factor, right? Because if I were to set this equal to 0 and solve, I would get a positive 4 when I do that. And we just took the opposite of 4 and put it on the inside. Now I need to deal with the second half of this, which means I'm not done factoring this polynomial, because it says if it is, then factor the polynomial. So we have x squared minus 2x minus 8. Now, since my coefficient is 1 here, I can just think about what multiplies to the last, which is negative 8, and adds to equal negative 2. So negative 6 times, no, not negative 6, negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. So I know that this factors to x minus 4 and x plus 2. So those are the other two pieces of the solution. So we also have an x minus 4 and an x plus 2. Now you should recognize that one of the terms occurs twice. Since that term occurs twice, we really would need to rewrite that as being x minus 4 squared, because we're multiplying the same thing times itself, and then bring down the x plus 2. All right, so let's take a minute and look at number 3. It asks you to find f of negative 3, and there's two different ways that we can do this. We could just do substitution. So substitution would allow us to do this, in which case we would say, okay, f of 1/3 equals 3 times, instead of x, it'd be 1/3 to the 4th, plus 9 times, again, instead of x, it's 1/3 to the 3rd, plus 6, instead of x, it's 1/3 squared, plus 1/3 minus 1. Again, this is something you could type into your calculator, as long as you do so carefully, but really quickly. 1 squared is 4, 3 squared is 81, and we're multiplying that by 3, plus 9 would be 1 squared is 1, 3 cubed is actually 27, plus 6, 1 cubed is 1, 3 squared is 9, plus 1/3 minus 1, so 3 times 81 would be 3 over 81, and 3 over 81 reduces to 1/27. That'd be 9 over 27, which reduces to 1/3. 6 over 9 reduces to 2/3, plus 1/3 minus 1. And in the end, if you typed this in, you would end up with f of 1/3 equals 10 over 27. Now, if you had typed this all in your calculator at once, that would have been fine, but make sure you turn it back into a fraction so you get the fraction answer. The other option that you have is, instead of using substitution, you could use synthetic division, remembering that the remainder is the solution. So we would set it up 1/3. There's an x to the 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and then the constant, so none of the terms are missing. So it'd be 3, 9, 6, 1, negative 1. Bring down my 3. 1/3 of 3 is 1, which would give me 10. 1/3 of 10 would be 10/3. 6 plus 10/3 would be 28/3. And this one you can't use decimals on, otherwise you're going to lose the exactness of your answer. 1/3 times 28/3 would be 28/9. 28/9 plus 1 is 37/9. 1/3 of that would be 37/27. And then negative 1 plus 37/27 is 10/27. So again, my solution for f of 1/3 is 10 over 27. Again, since this one didn't ask you to do it both ways, you can choose which method you want to use and go with that. All right, number 4, solve this equation. So in this case, because there are 4 terms, I would probably try to do grouping first, because if I tried to do grouping and it worked, that would make my life easier. So when I look at this, I see that I can pull out an x squared, and then I'd get x minus 4. When I look at this one, I'm thinking 4 would be the largest one that I can pull out. But it wouldn't matter, because if I can't pull out 20, then I don't get a coefficient of 1, and 20 doesn't go into it. So now I know grouping won't work. So since grouping doesn't work, that means we're going to have to go ahead and go to our calculator. So we're going to have to pull out our graphing calculator, and we're going to have to find one of the zeros, right? Go to your graphing calculator, find a 0. Now we should also make a list of our p's and q's first, right? So p is 48, q is 1. So in the end, we would have positive or negative 1 and 48, and then 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 and 12, 5 wouldn't work, 6 works, so it would be 6 and 8, and 7 wouldn't work. So then we would divide these to find all of our possibilities. So our possibilities, because all we're doing is dividing by 1, is positive or negative any of these numbers. So we can go ahead and take out our graphing calculator at this point, go to our y equals, and type in the equation. So it was x to the third minus 4x squared minus 20x plus 48. We can go ahead and graph that. Okay, so I see zeros in these 3 different spots. So I'm just going to pick one of them to try. Why don't we try the one in the middle here? So remember, to get to that, we have to calculate. All right, we're going to have to calculate the trace. So we press second and then calculate. And we're trying to find a 0. Right, and so it asked me to go to the left of that point. So I'm just going to scroll until I see my cursor. My cursor should be somewhere around 1 for my x. So there's my cursor. So right now if I go over here, I'm to the left of it, and then I can scroll to the right and go to my right bound. And I can guess about where it is. Press enter again, so it's telling me 2, 0. So from my calculator, I know that 2 is a solution, and that matches one of my p's that I have up here. So I know that x equals 2 is one of my solutions, so I can use 2 in synthetic division. I have a cube, a square, an exponent of 1, and then the constant, so none of them are missing. So this is 1, -4, -20, and 48. Now you could have used one of the other zeros as well, but I just chose to use the 2. In the end, you'll get the same answer. So this would be 1, 2, -2, -4, -24, -48, and 0. So this confirms that it is a solution and that my new equation is x squared minus 2x minus 24. Now since my first coefficient is 1, the nice thing is all I have to think about is what multiplies to the last, which in this case is -24, and adds to equal the middle, which is -2. So numbers that multiply to -24 but add to 2, so -6 times 4 is -24, and they also add to -2. So we have x minus 6 and x plus 4. So my answers would come from setting each of those equal to 0 and solving. So we would add 6 and we'd have x equals 6. We would subtract 4 and have x equals -4. So my first answer came from the calculator. The other answers came from factoring. And I should have 3 solutions, right? Always double check that. Since my highest exponent is 3, that tells me I should have 3 solutions in the end. And in this case, I do have 3 solutions, -4, 2, and 6. Those are my 3 solutions. All right, now go to the next video to view the back side.